sector, akin to some of the conversations I was hearing Apostle Ambe make the other day about shipbuilding in Japan and horticulture in Holland and so on and so forth. I feel that since we are faced with a situation and at a time when we are having a comprehensive conversation about where our educational system is at the moment, the time is also right to extend that conversation to a complete overhaul of that system. And I feel that it's a conversation that should bring all stakeholders on board.
Okay. His proposal.
Yes, I think it's a very thoughtful idea, but the challenge we have right now is that Southern Cameroonians seem to look like the shape of a camel. The camel is a very shapeless animal, and as it stands now, we are very shapeless. There are about 4 different factions in the former British colony of Southern Cameroons. We have secessionists, we have, like what I saw him address there, Confederalist, we have Unionist, and we have Federalist. The population is broken in these 4 different sectors, and nobody wants to listen to the other. My challenge, and I've said it and I'm still repeating it, until the majority of Southern Cameroonians come under a particular umbrella, we cannot make an effective decision. The confusion amongst us is, first of all, too much. I have said our fathers in 1953 in the Eastern Regional House had differences in political ideology, but they had a common goal. Despite the differences in ideology Foncha had with Miller, had with Mukete, had with Jua, had the rest, when it was time for them to walk out of the Eastern Regional House of Nigeria in Enugu, they all walked out unanimously. When they came back to the Southern Cameroons, that was when you knew they had different ideologies. Ndele was not walking out of that house because he did not love Nigeria. Foncha was walking out because he did not love Nigeria. Despite the fact that they had differences in this ideology, when it was time for them to walk out, all of them walked out. They came back, Foncha from KNDP and other political parties. Those political parties connoted different political ideologies. But how come these people with different political ideologies were bold enough to walk out of the Eastern Regional House? I want us to understand that despite the fact that we have different political ideologies in Southern Cameroon, nobody should be considered an enemy. Because amongst us in the English-speaking region, a man that speaks as a federalist is considered by a secessionist as a demon. He that stands for decentralization is considered by a confederalist as a principality. With this divergence in our views, this conflict in our perception, it is difficult for us to come under one umbrella. Even if we are going to fix the educational system tomorrow, part of that education could be fixed by me, and part by you, doctor, and part by Mr. Ndifor. What if 3 of us stand on 3 different platforms and 3 ideologies? That does not even allow us to unite and come under a single umbrella. We may differ in philosophy, differ in perception, but we should not differ in what we want to handle as a problem. As it stands now, somebody will tell you that almost every Southern Cameroonian is a secessionist. Another person will stand and tell that every Southern Cameroonian is a federalist. Another person will tell that those who are accepting federation are poor, who have been bought over. The whole thing is jumbled up in such a way that if you and I, Dr. Gabilla, want to sit now to restructure the education, just hear what you said. You spoke of the video, you heard me talking about the curriculum of our educational system, which were taught things that are not familiar with our own practical reality and our environment. That is something that if I'm coming now, somebody will look at me as a black leg. But the idea is something that will benefit every Southern Cameroonian, because that educational system is not a political party, it is not a wing, it's not a pressure group, it's not a union. It is for the benefit of every Southern Cameroonian. Because our political wars and differences have built walls that separate us from even targeting things that concern even the common man. If that educational system is properly reorganized, my child, your child, and generation unborn will benefit from it. But what is separating us right now? You are a confederalist, this one is a secessionist, this one is a unionist, this one is a federalist. By virtue of these political wars, we cannot even access ourselves to come to a consensus to bring a solution to the practical problems we are going through. That problem cannot be solved only by secessionists. Neither can it be solved by confederalists. Neither can it be solved by federalists or unionists. It should be solved by every Southern Cameroonian. Let us break down the walls of groups, wings, and systems of government and come as one people. I should be sitting with you on a table, even if I'm an opinion leader and you are a confederalist, and I feel free with you, knowing fully whether we are not working on your philosophy, we are working on something that can benefit every single Southern Cameroonian. That is my cry right now. That education is not secessionist education, it's not confederation education, it's not federalist education, not unionist education. It's education for our children, our unborn children. That is the truth. The peace we are looking for is not a secessionist peace. It's not confederational peace. It's not a federational peace. It is a peace for Southern Cameroonians. The infrastructure we want to build is not a secessionist infrastructure, neither a confederalist infrastructure, neither a federation infrastructure. It is infrastructure for Southern Cameroonians. If we are constructing Tiko Airport, it is not a secessionist airport. Mafe Airport is not a federation airport. Tiko Port is not a unionist port, it's a port for Southern Cameroonians. Whether you are a confederalist, you are a secessionist, you are what, let us come under a banner of fixing Southern Cameroons and not trying to build walls that separate us because of differences in political ideologies.
Okay, Mr. Ndifor, we are understanding that many more proprietors are erecting structures or building schools in Douala, in Yaoundé, and in other towns. Are we seeing a shift of this educational hub that the southwest and northwest regions used to actually epitomize, shifting this way? Are we losing out of this?
Most definitely, Leonard. There is no question about that. But I want to take from where Apostle Ambe and Dr. Gabilla left. I think Dr. Gabilla brought up a very, very bright idea. The idea of Anglophones coming together under one canopy. And Apostle Ambe also came up with the idea that we need to break down barriers to be able to come together. I will just add to that by saying that given what the consequences of the situation on the ground right now, the crisis we have right now, it's going to be a little difficult for all of these very bright ideas to come to play, which means that we have to begin by trying to end the crisis. That is where we have to begin. We have to start by ending the crisis. And for us to end the crisis, we have to come to the table. We have to talk. We have to reach an agreement on certain point. It is true that we, at this point, we are each one of us is so bitter, and we are holding very strong on our different positions. But at some point, we will eventually have to come to the table to sort our things. And when we come to the table, we should be ready to give up something and be ready to accept something. And it is only when we have come to the table, we have ended the crisis in the Northwest and Southwest, then we as Anglophones, we can now start thinking about how we can together rebuild our regions. Because like Dr. Gabilla said, this can be an opportunity for us to turn things around. We have seen situations where, like in Rwanda, where the country was devastated by war, and today it is being heralded all over the world as one of the best, the most developed territories in Africa or countries in Africa. We can take advantage of that. We can take advantage of the situation in which we are and rebuild our own regions. But we have to start by finding a solution, a lasting solution to the current crisis, because all the beautiful things that Dr. Gabilla has said and which Professor Apostle Ambe has talked about, all of this will only come to fruition if the war in the Northwest and Southwest comes to an end. In as much as the war persists, we cannot really carry on any meaningful project to improve educational situation in the territory. But for now, while the war continues, my plea is that for those who initially called for the, I'm not trying to blame anybody here, but for those who initially called for the war or for the boycott of schools, you have the responsibility to talk to those on the ground, talk to the fighters on the ground, educate them, because there is need for this kind of education for them to know that, oh yes, there is no policy against school boycott. And if anybody is going ahead, pushing ahead to attack school, you are doing so at your own risk, and there will be consequences. And for those, we understand that the fighters on the ground are being funded, and those who are funding it, they should tell them that we are not going to continuously fund this war if you continuously attack our children, if you continuously attack teachers, if you continuously attack schools. So all of this needs to be done. If effective school resumption needs to take place in some of the, it is understood that in some places this crisis might be too serious, that it may not be easy for children to go to school. But if a hardline policy is put in place and strong education is done, we see the guys, the separatist guys and their leaders and all of that, they make powerful audio statements on social medias, and we have not seen a strong statement against attack on schools, against attack on teachers and all of that. And even when these schools and teachers are attacked, we don't see a strong condemnation and warning to those who do that. So we need to be upfront, instead of always coming up when those things happen to say, oh, we are not the ones responsible, if it's not the fighters responsible, if it's Atanganji boys who are responsible and all of that. When we start doing that, we empower them more and more to continuously go attacking schools, because at the end of the day, we will say that it was that the schools were attacked by Atanganji boys and all of that. But we have to be firm to let them know that the consequences of doing that is on them. And when we start doing that, I think the fighters on the ground will start piping down on the attacks on schools.
Okay, they'll start piping down. Let me take a few messages now. Nyanti is writing from Kumba. It's never too late to go to school. In our days, we have adult school. Yes, your days are not the days of our children. This is a very competitive war. Good evening, Mr. Liu, and to Apostle Ambe. Ngwa, you are doing a commendable job, and may God bless you. There are absolutely nothing positive about boycotting schools. No single benefit can be advanced. The struggle took an anti-intellectual course when the teachers joined the lawyers. The lawyers grounded the courts while the teachers grounded schools. Now the separatists decided to hang only on schools because they know it's a vulnerable sector. Why are the courts functioning? Why are universities and higher institutions functional? Only the secondary and basic education sectors have been under attack, and their staff and students. The little children know nothing. That's why they are being attacked. Even the idea of ghost town is also an attack on schools, because it's on a Monday. All these people preaching no school were actually taught in the system and went out on scholarship. They don't mean well for the people. Schools should open. Suremi is writing a very good evening to you, Suremi. Good evening, Mr. Liu, and to the house. We do not understand why everybody is hanging on schools. Okay. This one says, Mabison writing from Kumba says, Mr. Liu and members of the panel, maintaining discipline in school has been an uphill task. Okay. Good evening. Apostle Ambe made a good presentation of the losses due to school boycott. He, however, ended with an untrue assertion that boys in the bushes cannot walk beyond the instructions given by their leaders. I'm in Bamenda, and let me inform you that these guys don't believe in any leadership. The leaders themselves have gone silent. We have groups of thugs who harass people at every twist and turn. Okay. Good evening. It's Gilbert in Bamenda. Now that school is almost starting in. Government has stopped circulation in town. What did they expect people to go to school? The educational system of the Northwest and Southwest was all about cramming to pass GCE. Intelligent and smart are far away from going to school. It was not the war or crisis which caused the schools not to open. It was instead the schools not opening which caused the crisis. I'm John, writing from Germany. Good evening, Davidson from Oyuka. The migration of children to East Cameroon has not assimilated them. If for over 50 years assimilation did not succeed, it cannot then succeed over the next 100 years. Okay. Good evening, Mr. Kum. As long as school campuses, students, people, teachers in the Northwest and Southwest are targeted by armed men, an uneducated child alive is better than a dead one killed by a bullet. I'm leaving it writing in Bermuda. This one says, you have the finest panelists. Congratulations. Thank you very much. Good evening, Mr. Liu. I really appreciate your program. Those guys who are calling for school boycott, check where they have more. They have moved their families to other towns, so they have nothing to lose. Some even work with some proprietors in other towns so that the population will move to their schools. Mr. Liu, the whole thing is just self-interest. Good evening, Big Brother. I am Wenix Close Ejuben, writing from Yaoundé. Thank you very much. Dr. Gabilla, you see some persons actually asking that it is time to review the situation and turn things around, but very difficult given the stakes on ground. You hear some people writing saying that it's difficult because many persons no longer listen to any leadership. People could sit in any village at any level and take a decision whether school should go on or not. It's quite complex.
Indeed, Mr. Kum, and I just want to comment on that, just to speak, build on what Apostle Ambe said, just to tell him that he would know, as a man of God, that there is nothing more acute and accurate and appropriate that calls out the leader in him than when he's confronted with a difficult problem. I say that to say that as a society, as a people, we are not leaderless. It's true that there are certain stakeholders that are louder than others. But as a community, as a people, there are foundations upon which our society sits. The foundations of our society sits upon our traditional leaders that are respected across the board. I often tell myself, if Ngwa picks up the phone and calls Chuayaba and tells him ABC, he may not agree with Ngwa, but there's a certain sense of reverence that he has for that institution that is represented by the Mancon Fohtung that would cause him to listen. Our educational system is sitting on the faith community. We know that the Catholics, the Baptists, the Presbyterians, the Pentecostals have owned and run so many schools in the Southern Cameroonian community, and of course not forgetting the government. So I feel that, and just to speak to the complexity of the situation, that the situation which we face at the moment calls for leadership to arise. Leadership to arise out of the faith community, leadership to arise out of the, what do you want to call this, out of the traditional institutional community, leadership to arise out of opinion leaders. I'm thinking of people like Barrister Nico Hale, who has not occupied any official position in government per se, but enjoys respect across the board in the Southern Cameroonian community. And I can list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 odd people that I feel that if we could have such a conversation that kick-started around the question of education, we can have a brainstorming that is comprehensive, that has all the stakeholders on board, facilitated domestically or even virtually, and come up with concrete proposals that becomes the basis upon which we engage the government. I don't think we need authorization to have such a conversation. And I feel that we have the leadership collective from the faith community, from the traditional authority communities, from our political leaders, and pretty much from our opinion leaders, to be able to have such a comprehensive conversation that says, yes, we understand you have disagreement on the whole range of levels, but let's talk about education. And just to build on what Mr. Ndifor said earlier on, contrary to what he thinks, I feel that having such conversations at this point in time would be critical for us to break down the barriers. Because a conversation on education, for example, it's a conversation that knows no creed, knows no color. It cuts across all the board. By the way, in mature democratic societies, the ideological dispositions that we have about confederation, federation, centralism, unionization, or independence, they are just political opinions. At the end of the day, federalism, confederalism, independence, it's just a system of governance about the organization of management of people and resources. It's not the content, it's not the details about the transformation of the lives of the people. So I believe that we should have a two-speed system of trying to address this. We should start having sectoral-based conversation on how to pick up ourselves in education, in agriculture, in tourism, in a number of key sectoral areas, in health, that affect the well-being of the people directly, while we are still trying to find ourselves around the big broader governance issues about the organization of the form of the state and the management of resources and our relationship moving forward. I feel that conversation should be two-speed. Both conversations can happen at the same time. We just need champions in each case to kickstart the conversation, and who knows, maybe that will become the pathway along which we find ourselves, because definitely we can agree about what is in the best interest of the well-being of our children. That conversation is an internal conversation that we need to have, and I think that it can move things forward, Mr. Kum.
Okay, but are you also, have you asked yourself why this particularity on schools? Because we have businesses that are going on in the southwest and northwest regions. We have other sectors that are operational. Why pin down on the schools?
So Mr. Kum, like I said earlier on, this is where Ambe and I differ, because I think that the narrative according to which there is an attack on schools. Let me put this in the law of proportions, Mr. Kum, to maybe help strengthen my point. We can point to the I don't want to call it an isolated incident in trying to suggest that I minimize it. No, I don't want to minimize it. But we know the number of voices we have in the movies. We know the capacity across the board of firepower, for lack of a better word. If we would want to compare and say that one school was attacked in Kumba, one school was attacked in Limbe, and we use that as the basis to say that schools are being attacked, and as a result, there's an assault on educational policy, I think that we will be being economical with the truth. Because if you compare the potential that there is to unleash an attack on schools in the event where there was an official no-school policy, compared to what I want to call the incidences that we would like to hang on, you would see that from a statistical perspective, you would not even be able to sustain the argument that schools are being attacked.
Yeah, but
now I would rather hang on the argument that says, because of the deteriorating security situation, people are victims to threats that are going on the rampage and are attacking people left, right, and center. It's not only teachers that are being attacked. People are being attacked across the board. People are being kidnapped across the board. It's not only students that are victims. And I maintain the argument that the others have afforded thus far, that because of the enclave nature of our rural communities, the security situation in those places permit for normality to facilitate schools. Students will run away for their dear lives, teachers will run away for their dear lives, and of course, anybody who attacks a teacher or a school or a student should be condemned with the strongest term possible, like Mr. Ndifor said. I agree with him that coming from across the board from all of our opinion leaders, the whole question of the sacredness, for lack of a better word, of our educational system, of our educational institutions, of our teachers, of our learners, should be a message that we drum across the board. But we need to build a consensus towards having that conversation. And my submission is that we are not going to get at that consensus if some segments amongst us continue to want to play the blame game, you know, because then you will be, oh, you are responsible, oh, you're not responsible, you should not have boycotted in the first place, oh, I did not boycott, and then we missed out on the silent important point that says,
but
what do we do to revamp the educational system?
Talking about attacks on schools, let's take the case of schools in Bamenda. You used the example of Sacred Heart College, Mancon, where you studied, but we also understand that the school is heavily guarded. Isn't that true? As well as other schools. Unlike the school that was attacked, unlike the school that was attacked in Kumba and in Limbe.
I understand that Sacred College Mancon is heavily guarded for whatever reason, right? But I don't necessarily think that that's the reason why they are not being attacked. Mr. Kum, in the années de Braise in the 1990s, you know, we had Nijon Foodies children in our school. When the ghost town started and the governor of the Northwest Province at the time wanted to send military people to come and guard Sacred Heart College. I was in Form 1, Form 2 at that time. I remember our principal expressly declining the offer and telling them that the school belongs to the community, the people own the school and own the community, and so would not attack it. Now, if the current administration of the school found it opportune for whatever reason, perhaps the children of certain key figures in the barons in the regime were going there and they felt that they were going to be susceptible to certain attacks. I don't know. I would only speculate.
But Sacred Heart College,
I don't think that Sacred Heart is going on.
No, but Sacred Heart College, Sacred Heart College,
soldiers of those premises.
Doctor,
there are a number of schools going on in Bamenda, in Goya, across certain segments of the Southern Cameroonian region that are within reach. This is the point I'm trying to make. They are within reach of the voices in the bushes, but they are not being attacked because effectively there is no official school boycott policy in place.
Dr. Gabilla, are you aware of the fact that Sacred Heart College was attacked and burnt some years back, and that Shesans, you are one of them, I don't know whether you contributed, Shesans heavily contributed money to mend whatever was burnt?
Yeah, St. James Dormitory was burnt.
So,
St. James Dormitory lower side was burnt. Now, if you know the location of St. James Dormitory within the broader campus, it's one of those other buildings that are accessible from the further end left bush area of the campus. And yes, there was a generous outpouring of support from the Shesan community, which caused some of us to cynically actually wish that they should burn more of those dormitories because they were overdue for renovation. But that was being cynical. It was burned and it was rebuilt, and that never happened again. Now, whether, of course, what happens, the responsibility was thrown across the board. The fighters in the Busie, the non-state actors, said that it was the state actors that were responsible. Of course, the state actors use that as a means as the non-state actors. In the case of conflict, without the possibility of establishing a well-independent investigation for such context, we will continue the ping-pong blame game as you're responsible, I'm responsible. At the end of the day, conflict creates an environment for education not to strive. Let us have a conversation about ending the conflict. Let us have a conversation about reconstructing the battered educational system. I think that will be a more forward-looking, progressive position. And of course, I agree with what Mr. Ndifor says. I feel that the message should be sent very strongly to all stakeholders interested in the welfare of the Southern Cameroons that we should preserve our schools, our educational system, and do everything to reverse the downward spiral trend that Apostle Ambe is describing. I think it's a collective responsibility. Now, for us to take collective responsibility, we need to drop the blame and accusatory tone. Unless there's anybody on this platform that can tell me on good authority that they know the sources of the people who, for example, carried out the massacre in Kumba. Okay. And in which case, I would say that they should not just say that on good authority. They should take it a step further and let processes be instituted for these people to be brought to justice.
Okay.
But in the context of a conflict, it doesn't add value us blaming who is responsible. Let us deal with the root causes. Let's bring the conflict to an end. Above all, let us have a conversation that says, how do we rebuild from here moving forward?
Okay. Prime Hour has been hijacked by the electricity supply company. Okay. Prince Dikum, writing from Sweden, he says, well, Mr. Liu, talking of school boycott, I don't see it from that perspective. Teachers were arrested, tortured, and maimed. The environment was completely unfavorable for children to go to school. The South African asks Mr. Ndifor a very good question. Where he continues going to school, if will he continue going to school if military come and burn down his house, beat him, and humiliate his family? Mr. Ndikum says children should go to school in safe areas. Okay. Daisy, writing from Kumba, says, good evening, Mr. Liu, and to everyone. We are tired of wearing assorted clothes in our primary and secondary schools, and it's difficult to identify gunmen from school children. I don't think there is any parent who sends his or her child without thinking of insecurity. It's not safe. Teachers are still being killed, and nobody is saying anything. We want to go to school, but we also need security. Our safety is more important than anything. Good evening to you, Daisy, from Kumba. Good evening, Mr. Liu, and all the panelists. The initiators of this so-called struggle didn't sit to evaluate the repercussions of their actions before they leaped, and now they have raised a generation of lost youths whose negative actions are abated by a government which has refused to truly drag their recalcitrant children to themselves using their left hand after beating them with the right hand. And in the meantime, the struggle is struggling. Britain is writing from Yaoundé. Good evening, Mr. Liu. This is Galovndo. Those who initially called for school boycott in the English-speaking regions should be the same persons to announce school resumption in the said regions. The right to education remains a fundamental human right. Okay, this one is writing from Boya. Daisy, I got you already. Good evening. Kizeru Lawrence, very good points there. Keep it up. Thank you very, very much. Mr. Liu, please, I wanted to ask your desk, can we come together and keep putting blames in on one side? Is Mr. Ndifor doing? Okay. Hello, Mr. Liu. I'm Faith, writing from Kumba. I want to ask desk, who do they think is responsible for school boycott? Because both parties are targeting teachers and school and students. Okay. You are getting what those who are watching us are saying. They think that those who call for the school boycott should call it off. Is it possible at this juncture, or the situation is become more complex because the teachers themselves who initiated this whole concept of school boycott are themselves victims today?
Of course, they presented some things to be met. Mm-hmm. They wanted a change in the educational structure of the Southern Cameroons. I'm sure that was a worry of the teachers. Mm-hmm. And when they submitted that, it wasn't respected. The leader that happens to be the man in prison right now, Mr. Tassan, president of Katu by then, he said either the government pays attention to what they are complaining, or the government will feel the wrath of the teachers. When that was instituted, lawyers equally went out, marching in the streets. We saw how officers of the law began beating lawyers and humiliating them in the streets. And that was the reason why we are where we are today. My problem is not calling back school or not calling back school. My problem is the atmosphere in these two regions right now, psychologically. Even if they stand tomorrow to call out peace school, there are parents who have vowed that their children will not go to school, even if they happen to call school resumption, because some children were in a school sometimes some year ago, and some unknown gunmen walked into that school campus and shot down those children. That one already remains as a picture in the subconscious of every father, every mother. You will hear them tell you, I prefer to have a living illiterate child than to have a dead genius. Those are things we talk about them passively, as if they are events that have just taken place and they are gone. Those events are very much alive in the minds and the subconscious of parents of that region of the country. Let us not beat around the bush. Even if tomorrow the supposed persons who said that school should boycott come on different TV platforms and say, we have told everybody to stay at peace, schools are resuming, there are parents deep within them, until they see a complete seizure of war, a ceasefire, they will never send their children to school. This thing is far beyond pronouncement. It's a psychological problem. Many people are psychologically affected because they have the fear. Do you know how many parents walked in the street marching when the children were killed in Kumba? Do you know how many parents felt discouraged when children were kidnapped in PSS? That alone has left an indelible mark in the lives of so many people, that as long as guns are still smoking in those regions, we don't need to carry out any special campaign for schools to resume. There are parents who will not allow their children to go to school. That's the truth. They will only find security, and they are not going to school not because they don't have the means, but because they don't have the serene atmosphere. They don't have that calm atmosphere where education thrives. So their challenge is not children going to school. Under what condition are the children going to school? Calling for schools to resume is not a challenge. We are calling it on television. But if you meet some parents on ground, we cannot sit on television and make conclusions. Meet these parents in the field and ask their opinion or what they think about school resumption. They will tell us, we like our children to go to school, but not under this kind of atmosphere, which means it is far beyond them loving children going to school. There is something bigger than their love for the children going to school that is hindering them from sending their children to school. What if we call and parents refuse to send their children? Because there is something controlling their mind right now, the fear of losing their children. So this thing falls back to the place of the ceasefire in the northwest and the southwest. That is the most positive way we can easily achieve the restoration of education back in these two regions. If not, it is true some parents are taking the risk to send their children to school, but in some areas today I can tell you parents can never send their children to school because there's a fear. There is a fear that tomorrow I can lose my child. There is a fear. Having people children who have not gone to school and they're better off.
Okay.
Education is no longer a must to them.
Okay. Mr. Liu, the unfortunate thing is that the Anglophone leaders in Europe are sending their children to school while us are being used as sacrificial lambs for the struggle. God will punish them. Walters is writing from Bamenda. Good day, Reverend. I want to ask you this question. Can you be at home hearing sounds of guns day and night, bullet flying everywhere you send your child to school? Okay. Good evening, sir. I just started watching your program, but it has ceased. Okay, yeah, we had an issue. We have not got light for 2 months. God is my refuge and shield. Okay, we pray that you receive light in the name of Jesus. Good evening, Mr. Liu. I totally agree with Dr. Gabilla. We should not be biased with our analysis. Let's stop the blame game and tackle the root cause. We keep saying one thing over and over. Peter is writing from Boya. Good evening, Media Prime. Take note that contrary to the fact that most schools were occupied, by Amber Boys, it is the reverse. Thanks. Anya Emil is writing from Bamenda. This one says, irrespective of any kind of argument presented there in your studio on the state of schools in the southern Cameroon vis-a-vis the crisis in the northwest and southwest, we should take note that we cannot have effective school activities in these regions until a negotiated peace settlement is reached to resolve the ongoing civil war. Okay. Neighbor is writing from Kribi. Good evening, Mr. Liu. My name is Victory from Douala. I am with tears seeing that question about Anglophone schools. Okay, it is well. Greetings, Mr. Liu, Apostle Ambe. You are a blessing to this nation. Yufunyoy Emmanuel, writing from Yaoundé. God bless you guys. Thank you very much. Oops. If the government took its responsibility, we would not have arrived at this point. Okay? This one says, I hear the level-headedness of Apostle. His wisdom has drawn many faithful followers of this program. God bless you, sir. Kibungla Divine, writing from Yaoundé. Good evening, Mr. Leo. It's Mr. Steve from Bamenda. How would students go to school? That bullets fly every day. This one says, most of our schools in Bamenda are going on, but not in our villages. And you know that, okay? This one says, before thinking of school resumption, let the conflict first come to an end. And believe me, my slogan is no effective learning in a war zone. Good evening, my name is King Son in Bamenda. How can the whole... Oops, yeah, it's not too clear. Good evening, Mr. Liu. I say that schools should not pay the price because they never launched this strike. This is Ntani Jennifer, writing from Yaoundé. Now, Ndifor, you and Apostle Ambe are suggesting that this crisis must come to an end before schools should take off in these regions. I'm sure that is also the opinion of Dr. Gabilla. What if the conflict were to drag on for the next 20, 30 years? Are you saying that children should sit at home because either of the sides, we're talking about the stakeholders in this conflict, do not want to make a compromise?
Leonard, as a matter of fact, I didn't say that schools or the conflict must end before schools go on. In fact, I am one of the proponents of the fact that schools' effort should be made to ensure that schools should continue even as the crisis persists. That's why I suggested earlier that both sides in the conflict have to take responsibility to ensure that school children and teachers and school campuses are protected. They should not be attacked. They should not be used for as camps, as war zones. And it is true there are some areas that are very, very difficult for schools to continue while the war persists. But there are a lot of areas where schools can still continue if only the fighters, both non-state and state fighters, take a fervent responsibility to ensure that these areas are protected from attacks. And like I discussed earlier, I said there needs to be some instructions from both camps asking those people on the ground fighting to know that they should not go after school children. They should not go, they should not attack teachers and all of that. You see, the reason why many children do not go to school or many teachers don't want to go to school is when they keep hearing news of this teacher being killed, a teacher killed yesterday, a teacher killed the day before yesterday. It creates a situation of fear and panic and create a situation where many people do not want to go to school. I am not talking about a situation where there is gun flying in the air and we are saying that children should go to school. I'm talking about a situation where schools are being disrupted and many people are scared to go to school because of the actions of the fighters on the ground. Their actions, the fact that several children are killed in a school in Kumba is enough to frighten children in other schools in Kumba from going to school. It's enough even to frighten children who are in Boya to go from going to school. We understand that a few days after the incident in Kumba, there was some panic that happened in Boya, and people just ran to schools to get their children because they were afraid the same thing might be happening in those schools. So what we are saying is that all these attacks should not happen. We are not talking about collateral damages. There are bullets flying in the air, and so the situation is not secure enough for people, not secure enough for children to go to school. We are talking about situations where people actually move onto school campus, attack children, burn down school buildings, attack teachers, kill them, and all of that. These are the kind of activities that we are condemning, and we are saying that if they stop this, it's going to go a long way to help that many schools in many parts of the region of the Northwest and Southwest can reopen. If they are not reopening, it's because of the fear of this kind of attacks. It is not necessarily because of the insecurity that comes as a result of the conflict. But that is not to say that it is not important for the war to come to an end. It is even more important that this conflict comes to an end so that children can freely. And that is why we are calling on the parties involved in the conflict that before they take any decision about whether they should come into a dialogue or not, they should consider those children who have not been going to school. And so when you sit maybe right here in the United States and say, oh, there is not going to be any discussion on whatever, if there is going to be any discussion, it should be a negotiation for our cessation and all of that, you should be thinking about the future of those children who will continue to suffer as the war drags on. And if you are a government minister and you say that we are not ready to talk with terrorists, we are not ready to negotiate with terrorists and all of that, you should be thinking about those young people in the villages, in the rural communities, whose life, whose future is at stake because the war keeps dragging on. Okay. And that is the reason why we are saying that it is important for both sides to come down to the table, sit on the table, discuss, and find a lasting, and I insist on a sustainable solution to the problem. Because it's not enough to just say that, oh, we are doing enough, we are trying enough, the government has done this, the government has done that. When we do all these half-baked approaches that we keep using, and the conflict persists, we are not helping anybody. So the school resumption and children's education is all entangled in the war. When the war persists, it becomes even more difficult for children to go back to school. Okay. And so it is very important for their resumption, the school resumption, which is very much tied to ending the conflict.
Mr. Leo, good evening to you all in the studio. Mr. Bless writing from Bonaberi. I really like your program. Thank you, Mr. Bless. Good evening, Mr. Leo. The day the part of Cameroon will know that English Cameroons are in problems, that is the day they will come out and cry out to the public. Can you imagine that now in Yaoundé you have to bribe 30,000 francs before your one child gets admitted into a technical school, even government schools? Mr. Liu, some people are really making money out of this war. Michelson is writing from Lagos in Nigeria. Dr. Gabilla, we are talking about the need for an end to the smoking guns in the two conflict-stricken regions of the Southwest and Northwest regions, but it is our wish, the wish of everybody, that tomorrow a peace settlement be found, but there is also that possibility for the conflict to drag on for the next 10, 20, 20, 30 years. What is that plan B to at least save some of our children who are finding it very difficult to go to school? Are we saying that without a peace settlement nothing should be done? Can't we start also already thinking about how to save the situation even as the conflict persists?
Mr. Kum, thanks again for that question. I propose the organization of an education summit, or a summit on education for the Southern Cameroons that brings together all stakeholders in this conflict, stakeholders from civil society, from the faith community, opinion leaders, of course our political parties and political actors, government, and non-state actors. Now, I propose that there should be interim measures that could be the outcome of such an educational summit. I know that when I outline all the list of these stakeholders, it's out of a need to acknowledge that they are stakeholders. I know that it's often our practice and tradition to wait for government to initiate anything meaningful before we can join the party to make it happen. But I think that in the context of the question of education, the Southern Cameroonian community and community leaders and opinion leaders should take the lead to convene a summit on education to address comprehensively the situation that we are facing, taking into account the persistence of the conflict and the fact that we are not clear as to when it's actually going to end. There are a lot of things that can be done in the interim. I think that this is a time and a moment for us to kickstart this responsibility to care, this Southern Cameroonian solidarity. Because when you hear the reports of, I think making reference to the World Bank report that speaks of the percentage of our children sitting as internally displaced in Douala and in Bafoussam, so in the littoral and the Western Province, who though being internally displaced are not going to school. Now, these are people who have managed to escape the war in the conflict regions and have run to safety, but are still constrained by economic hardship to be able to, maybe perhaps they cannot afford gaining access to educational institutions in those areas. There is no war in Douala. So it beckons upon the Southern Cameroonian community. I'm thinking about the faith community. I keep coming back to the faith community, maybe because I'm Apostle Ambe on the panel. I think that the faith community, the churches, the cultural communities, our religious institutions, and then the political communities, we need to have an educational summit that says, how can we begin to pool our resources in a self-help basis at this point to address the educational concerns of our internally displaced in the Western Province and in Douala, and the refugees that are in Nigeria and Ghana and out of the rest of the world. This is not a solution that requires state resources. It requires Southern Cameroonian leadership and solidarity. And I feel that these are things that can be done. These are things that we can pool resources, and of course, those who have been involved in this conflict for the last couple of years know that when we intend or we set our hearts to do some things like that, we actually get them done. There's the work of the Aya Foundation, the Belinda Babila Foundation that works among the refugees. That is space that is open for influence and impact. It does not require legislation. It does not require government authorization. It is self-help. It is you taking care, being your neighbor's keeper. I feel that that can be done and should be done for the internally displaced. Our children are in Douala and Yaoundé. Solidarity help groups, our cultural groups should come together. This is September that is coming, and start identifying. We should have ways of identifying, either through our cultural social groups, the children who are in such risky populations identified by the World Bank report, so that interventions can be designed in the immediate. That would be taking steps to solve practical problems while we can and while we are looking for solutions to the conflict. The same should be applicable to your teachers, especially teachers that were in the non-state sector, your private sector and your mission schools and so on and so forth. So they are not only, it's true that we tend to focus on the children and the educational needs, but there are a lot of our brothers and sisters that have lost educational opportunities, have lost their jobs, and have lost their means of livelihood. Now, if we are serious about being a people who are interested in their own well-being, I think it's about time we do not wait for the state to find solutions to such the segments of our population that are affected, but we pull ourselves together. And I feel that these are some of the kinds of things that we can agree around. You know, it doesn't matter whether you're a federalist or a confederalist or a secessionist or an independentist or a unionist and so on and so forth. We all agree on the fact that if there is food sitting in Douala Bonaberi not going to school because he doesn't have school shoes or school bags or 30,000 to pay for school fees, that food cultural group that is sitting in Douala should meet together and raise funds and send food to school. That church family that is sitting, that attends a church in Douala should take care of him. So these are the kinds of things that as a society, as a community, we can begin and should begin to do for ourselves to show that we have identified a problem, and we may not have the millions at the moment to resolve those problems, but we are sufficiently an organized people to start addressing and helping those of our most vulnerable affected members in the populations where your IDPs or refugees are concerned. As far as the context of the Northwest and the Southwest, the conflict regions are concerned, I still believe that such a summit on education that brings together stakeholders that are influential in those regions can bring all the parties, both government and non-state actors, with concrete proposals. Mr. Kum, and to the rest of the panelists, it doesn't help us having all this bickering and getting at each other. If such a summit on education is convened with people who sit back and think and come up with concrete proposals, then we have something to take to government. We have something to take to the non-state actors, armed groups, to say that, okay, this is a caveat. Let's create this space to isolate this sector and protect it, so that we have something to fall back on while we look for ways of addressing the broader concerns of the country. I'm of the view that such a summit on education is overdue, and I'm also of the view that such summits of consultative engagements by stakeholders should be extended not only to the educational sector, but to health and agriculture, and all the strategic key sectors that affect directly the well-being of our people.
Thank you. Yes, you also say from his line?
Yes, what he said is very important, and I think I buy the idea. We have to start working as a synergy to make sure that we accomplish what is eating the people, not on focusing on just the war. The war has consumed so much of us that we cannot think out of the war anymore. There are things that can be done within the war. Education can still be going on while the war is going on. Nobody is trying to stop education. Like what he has said is very important, but the truth is, I have a simple worry. The simple worry is this: there are people who are watching this program right now, wherever they are, because you don't buy with their system of government, you are an enemy. That's the truth.
There's some say I'm on a payroll. I am even looking for money.
That man has gone now to Confederalism. He was an Amber Knight. He's a demon. Why do you abuse people who do not buy your philosophy? We are all Southern Cameroonians. I'm entitled to my opinion. You are not forced to compel me to reason the way you reason. Nevertheless, there's a common denominator. We are coming from the same root. Let us sit down and see which idea is far more better. You can be running with what is not necessary. I can run with what is not necessary. Convince me. That's politics. Convince me to buy your idea. If you're not able to convince me, I convince you. That's how it is. But now you talk here, they will say, no, yeah, these Federalists are mad. Confederationists are mad. Please, let us put all this form of the state aside and know that we are a common people. There are persons who have died who were neither unionists, independentists, federalists. They were caught up by the war. They were caught up by this war. Many persons have died who did not belong to any form of state. So don't think that it's only those who belong to a particular form of state who are being affected by the war. Every Southern Cameroonian is affected by this war. And if we are going for a solution, we should go for a solution collectively as a people to put an end to the suffering masses who occupy those parts of the country. Rather than beating around the bush every day we are complaining. Me, I'm tired of all these different fragments, because what is eating us now is far beyond a title.
It's more for sorry, Mr. Liu, I mean to say to school resumption is not in the hands of the Amber Boys, but the government. I also want to suggest that you begin talking about the ways of resolving the war that has claimed a lot of lives, that is still going on daily. I've been talking about it now. I've been talking about it. Good evening, Mr. Liu. To me, school shouldn't pay the price, but on the other hand, the security of the people's students and teachers wouldn't be guaranteed. Schools resuming in these areas will mean these same teachers relocating to these areas. There's reasons the teachers went on this strike. Has it been properly handled? Yeah, but my question is, should we stay for the next 10 years because they are not properly handled? Good evening. I'm for Miss Sidoni from Kumba. There is nothing we can do to stop all this. We just have to put everything in God. He is the key. Good evening, Mr. Liu. I like the program. I cannot afford to miss it any day. Thank you. This one says, it is very risky for every one of us in these regions. Talk more of students. Let something be done as fast as possible, Mr. Liu. Nice Z, writing from Bamenda. Hi, Mr. Liu. Two wrongs cannot make a right. Our children need to go to school. Mr. Mbumbu Suleiman writing from Bamenda. Greetings, Mr. Liu. From what we have seen, the two camps are fighting for territory and not for the citizens. If schools keep on being closed, when shall the schools resume? If these camps have any law for the citizens, they should ensure that schools resume. Only the wealthy families can send their children out of the region, meaning the children in the villages and the poor will never be educated. Tabit is writing from Bamenda. Good evening to you all. I love your program and I'm very with the topic of today. I'm Fred, writing from Kumba. Good evening, Mr. Liu. It's better to have an illiterate child who is able to fend for his family than a professor marching with fires on the street looking for employment. Azong is writing from Batibo. Okay. I don't know whether I don't get the sense. Good evening, Mr. Liu. Larry writing from Kumba. The future of students in southern Cameroon is being kicked like a football in a football pitch. School starting or not, the effect has been felt. It's time to look for solutions to this whole saga. Thanks. Good evening to the panelists. The secessionists use school boycott to gain international support and recognition without having an atom of consequence that involved in it. Unfortunately for them, the strategy failed to attack international support and recognition. I'm Ngwa Peter Che. I'm writing from Ndop. Good evening, Mr. Kum. Is Ivo writing from Douala. How can children learn in tense environment where people die and get missing? Okay. Good evening. My name is Boris, writing from Tiko. I don't think some schools in the Northwest especially should pay any price again, because some students paid fees last 2016 and 17 did not study. I'm a victim. Good evening, my media prime. Even with the crisis, students still brave it to go to school. But how many teachers come to teach them? It's Pamela writing from Bamenda. Hi, sir. Stop showing your background picture. I'm seeing my bro shot in that image. The house was the first to be shot in Bamenda. Vitalis is writing from Bamenda. Okay, sorry for that. We have come to the end of today's edition of the program. We want to say thank you to you, Ndifor, for taking part.
Thank you so much, Leonard. Always a pleasure being a part of the program.
And also to you, Doctor, thank you for taking part in today's edition of the program.
Thank you so much, Leo, and it was a pleasure was mine, and thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, we also want to thank you for being present today, Apostle Ambe.
Thank you, Mr. Leo. Just to tell Anglophones that the first conference we need is not the national dialogue, it's an Anglophone conference. From there, we'll decide what we can take to a national dialogue.
Okay. We want to thank the production team and all of you who took time off to watch the program. Stay blessed. Bye-bye.